Morning, everybody. So this morning I'm just going to talk about Shelley Maytime Chintz, my marvellous Maytime, which I started collecting not long after I joined the club back in 2011, after seeing it in a couple of people's collections and deciding that it was very pretty and very evocative of spring in our back garden. So thought, oh, that'd be nice. I'll have a couple of pieces of that to add to the collection, never dreaming that it was going to turn into something of an obsession in terms of finding pieces, but it has. So Shelley Maytime Chintz was first listed in the pattern books in about February of 1938. And one of the first pieces that was listed in the pattern book was the Neptune lamp base, along with some cup shapes. And production of pieces started pretty much from that time. And as I said, from the outset, it seems like the pattern's been very popular with customers, and it was reflected in the wide variety of pieces that were created with Maytime. It appears on quite a few different shapes and pieces. So this is a copy of the piece in the pattern books with the lamp base and the matching shade, which had a smaller version of the Maytime around the edge of the shade. This is my piece without the shade. Haven't been able to get something that I can put to it to show the shade as well, but we'll get there in the end. So yeah, from 1938, there were pieces put on both earthenware and porcelain. The first cup shape listed is 0105, and that's listed sort of on Empire and a tall dainty floral. And there were at least 11 cup shapes listed with Maytime on them. And on top of that, there were lots of pieces of earthenware as well, including the lamps, ashtrays, vases, jugs, toast racks and egg cups. So lots and lots of pieces that have got Maytime on them. This is a sample of the lithographs prior to firing and then what it looks like post-firing. So you can sort of see why people have been drawn to it. On the litho, it actually doesn't look all that great. It just looks sort of very browny, beigey, nondescript, but on firing, it actually turns into quite a vibrant and pretty pattern. And I think that's obviously something that people were drawn to. And given the era that it was introduced, and given that a lot of the countries that were receiving it were heading into, were already in depression and sort of heading towards a war, not that most people would realise that in the first place, but it was something that was bright and pretty and sort of evocative of a better time, which I think is partly why it's probably been so successful. And majority of Maytime pieces are accompanied by the green that we know, the sort of darker, vivid green, with most of the pieces having some colour on the outside. And it looks like most of the pieces in China were on ideal china, and a large proportion of that was sent to Canada and the US. Some of it was received out here in Australia, but it looks like most of it was targeting the Canadian and US market at the time, which Shelley was doing quite successfully. But there were also a number of colour options that the designers put in place, with a couple of them, the pale green, the really pale green option, the sort of whole pattern, and also the pale yellow, along with the traditional darker green that we mostly see in the Maytime. The types of colours that have been used, particularly on the outer part of the cups, include the pale yellow, pale green, black, pink, sage, and red. And cups were also designed to be a solid colour with the gold edging as well, and also produced with a floral handle. So this is an example of the sort of pale yellow that has been produced. Not as pretty, I think. I think the colour's a bit wishy-washy, so it doesn't do as much justice to the Maytime. It just, yeah, just doesn't sort of highlight it as nicely, I think. But some of the other colours that they've used still are quite vibrant and quite pretty. And you can see a sample of the other colours, the pink and the sage green, the bright green, the yellow and the black on a variety of cup shapes as well. And then the solid colourway with the gold trim, which is quite pretty. It actually enhances it as well, I think. But if I'm honest, the green is definitely my favourite, but then that's what I collect, so it sort of fits in. The other interesting thing is there's no mention anywhere of Queen Anne having Maytime, but Bruce provided me with some photos, and in that group of photos and information was some photos that had been taken by Gary Hoare back in 2014, and one of them has a Queen Anne sugar bowl and jug with Maytime on panels, and yet it doesn't seem like there's any mention of Maytime being on a Queen Anne shape that I can find in any of the books, and none of the pattern numbers sort of match as well. So I'm not quite sure whether for some reason it just hasn't been noticed or whether these were done as a special order for somebody, but I've never seen examples of them ever come up, but these obviously were in Gary's collection. So yeah, it was very interesting to see these. And just looking at a few different pieces that are now in my collection. So I've sort of picked out a few different ones. Obviously, a nice tea for two in the Cambridge, which I'm very happy to have. Thanks to Bruce. And some interesting pin dishes. The ones with the insignias on them, I think are quite interesting. You don't see those as often. So mostly I think they were done as potentially gifts for wives and girlfriends, those kinds of things. Nice to give to the ladies for special occasions from those organisations. And that's just a close-up of the two crests that are on the pin dishes that I have. I've seen a couple of others come up, so I know there's more of those kinds of things out there. So they were obviously something that the military at least thought was a suitable pattern to be used as a gift for their female participants. The other interesting one that I found was a souvenir from Cardiff Castle, and you don't often see the souvenirs in this kind of thing. It's usually more the miniatures that are produced. So this one was a nice surprise with the portrait of Cardiff Castle on the bottom of the ashtray. It's only a little one. So it's quite, yeah, it was quite a surprise to see that. And some of the other things that I've been able to pick up is a cigarette box with the ashtray on the top. So it sits as a lid on top of the cigarette box. And obviously you can use it to store them and use it as an ashtray when you're actually smoking. And the Tazza, which I'm not sure what you call them. Generally, we'd say a comport or a Tazza and a posy vase. I know they're fairly common, but the Tazza's not quite so common. Don't see them very often. Okay, and I'm just being a bit cheeky here. So this is just a bit of a view of what's in my cabinets. As some of our Australian members would know it sort of takes up a fair bit of our room. Uh, and yeah, you can see the variety of pieces that I've got in the cabinets. Apologies for the photographs, the lighting is not fantastic, but I've got, yeah, a whole cabinet full of Maytime. But I think there's still a few pieces that I don't have and I'm still looking for, but I've accepted that I'm probably never going to find some of those. So I keep looking, keep hoping, but there's not a great deal more room in there. I'm sure I can squeeze a couple of pieces in if I really want to, but obviously there are still some pieces that I'm very interested in finding, and this is probably the holy grail for me, is the floral handle. I'm sure some of you are lucky enough to have some of that, if not all of it, of which I'm extremely jealous, but so far I have not been successful in finding any of it. Or if I have found any pieces, I just haven't been able to afford them. So it'll be the holy grail that I'll probably never achieve, but it is beautiful. And there are obviously some pieces out there that somebody might want to part with eventually. But that is certainly one of the pieces that I don't have any of in my collection at this stage. Any questions?